On a crisp autumn morning in October 1994, in the quiet farming community of Dysart, Iowa, a mother placed her infant daughter down for what should have been an ordinary nap. The child, 7-month-old Christina Marie McNeil, wore a soft pink sleeper. Her blonde hair had just started to grow in wisps across her head. Her mother, 23-year-old Jennifer McNeil, checked the baby monitor one final time before stepping outside to help her husband with afternoon chores. When Jennifer returned 90 minutes later, the crib stood empty. The window above it hung open, screen pushed outward. A cold wind moved through the nursery, scattering the pages of a children's book left on the changing table. For nearly 3 decades, investigators would ask themselves the same question that paralyzed Jennifer McNeil as she stood in that doorway, her hands beginning to shake. Where had Christina gone, and who could have taken her from a locked house in broad daylight? Dysart sits in Tama County, eastern Iowa, where Highway 174 cuts through fields of corn and soybeans that stretch toward horizons broken only by grain silos and farmhouse roofs. In 1994, the town claimed barely 1,400 residents. Everyone knew everyone. Doors remained unlocked. Children played unsupervised in yards until the streetlights came on. The McNeil family lived on Birch Street, in a modest 2-story house painted white with green shutters, set back from the road behind a row of maple trees just beginning to turn orange and gold. Jennifer worked part-time at the Dysart Public Library, shelving books 3 mornings a week. Her husband, Robert McNeil, was 31, a mechanic at Anderson's Auto Repair on Main Street. They had married young, right out of high school, sweethearts who had dated since Jennifer was 15. Robert was quiet, methodical, the kind of man who kept his tools organized by size and function, who washed his hands with pumice soap until they were raw. Jennifer was warmer, quicker to laugh, the daughter of a schoolteacher and a postal worker who still lived 2 streets over. Christina had been born in March, a planned pregnancy, celebrated. The nursery had been painted pale yellow. Robert had assembled the crib himself, following the instructions precisely. October 12th dawned clear and unseasonably warm, temperature climbing into the low 70s by noon. Jennifer had the day off. She spent the morning doing laundry, folding Robert's work shirts, while Christina lay on a blanket on the living room floor, batting at a mobile of fabric stars. Around 1 o'clock, Jennifer prepared a bottle, fed Christina, burped her, changed her diaper. She carried the baby upstairs, placed her in the crib, wound the musical mobile that played a tinkling lullaby. She cracked the window 2 inches because the upstairs held the afternoon heat. She pulled the door mostly closed and went back downstairs. At 1:15, Robert came in from the garage where he had been organizing winter equipment. He asked Jennifer to help him move a heavy workbench. She checked the monitor. Static, the faint sound of Christina's breathing. They went outside together. The garage sat detached from the house, maybe 40 feet from the back door. They spent time measuring, deciding placement, finally shifting the workbench against the far wall. Robert wanted to get his snow tires down from the rafters while they were out there. Jennifer helped steady the ladder. At 2:45, Jennifer walked back into the house. She climbed the stairs. The nursery door stood as she had left it, slightly ajar. She pushed it open. The crib was empty. The pink blanket lay bunched at one end. The window above the crib now hung wide open, the screen pushed outward, bent at the corner. Jennifer stood completely still for perhaps 5 seconds. Then she began to scream. Robert heard her from the garage. He ran. By the time he reached the nursery, Jennifer had torn through the room, looking in the closet, behind the rocking chair, under the crib, places far too small for an infant to be, but places where panic makes you look anyway. Robert grabbed the window frame, leaned out, scanned the backyard below. Nothing. No footprints in the grass. No ladder. No sign of forced entry downstairs. He ran through every room of the house, checking closets, bathrooms, the basement. Jennifer called the sheriff's department at 2:51. The dispatcher could barely understand her. Deputies arrived within 12 minutes. Deputy Mark Holland was first through the door, followed by Deputy Sarah Chen. They found Jennifer sitting on the nursery floor, Robert standing at the window looking out. Deputy Holland asked them both to step downstairs. He examined the window carefully. The lock mechanism appeared undamaged. The screen lay on the grass directly below the window, which faced the backyard. The drop measured approximately 15 feet to the ground. Deputy Chen began taking notes. She recorded the time, 3:07. She wrote down everything Jennifer and Robert told her, their voices overlapping, frantic. Sheriff Tom Bradshaw arrived at 3:20. He was 56, had been sheriff for 19 years, knew the McNeil family by sight if not by name the way he knew most people in Dysart. He stood in the nursery, turning slowly, taking in details. The mobile still turned, though the music had wound down. The baby monitor sat on the dresser, its green light indicating it was on. The diaper bag hung on a hook by the door. He asked Jennifer when she had last seen Christina. She said 1:15, maybe 1:20. He asked if anyone else had been in the house that day. No one. He asked about visitors recently. Jennifer's mother had stopped by 3 days ago. He asked about workmen, deliveries, strangers in the neighborhood. Nothing unusual, nothing at all. By 4 o'clock, every available officer in Tama County had been mobilized. They established a search perimeter of 2 square miles centered on the McNeil house. Volunteers began arriving. Neighbors, church members, people from surrounding towns who had heard the news on local radio. They formed lines and walked through fields, checking drainage ditches, abandoned buildings, creek beds. Dogs were brought in, given Christina's blanket to smell. The temperature began to drop as the sun lowered. Someone brought floodlights. The search continued after dark. Jennifer sat in her kitchen, surrounded by women from her church who made coffee and answered the phone that would not stop ringing. Robert stood on the front porch, watching the lights moving across the distant fields like slow fireflies. When officers asked if he wanted to join the search, he said no. He needed to stay in case someone called with information. Deputy Chen noted this in her report. She noted also that his hands were perfectly clean, though he had been working in the garage all afternoon. She noted that he had changed his shirt since they had first arrived. The shirt he had been wearing, he explained when asked, had oil stains on it. He had not wanted to appear on television looking like that. The local news had already arrived, cameras set up across the street. Part 2. The investigation. Clears throat. The search for Christina McNeil consumed Dysart completely. By dawn on October 13th, more than 300 volunteers had registered at the command post set up in the high school gymnasium. The Iowa Division of Criminal Investigation sent agents. The FBI dispatched specialists in infant abduction. Search teams divided the surrounding countryside into grid sections. They walked shoulder to shoulder through cornfields, the dried stalks rattling in the wind. They searched barns, sheds, old grain bins, anywhere a child might be hidden or abandoned. Helicopters flew overhead in widening circles. Divers prepared to search farm ponds. The media descended. Satellite trucks from Des Moines, Cedar Rapids, even Chicago. Jennifer and Robert appeared on camera that first evening standing on their front steps. Jennifer could barely speak, her face swollen from crying. Robert stood beside her, his arm around her shoulders, and made a statement he had written on a piece of paper. He asked whoever had taken Christina to please bring her back. He said they would not press charges, they just wanted their daughter home safely. His voice remained steady throughout. Those who watched later would comment on this. Some found it admirable, his composure in crisis. Others found it strange. Investigators interviewed the McNeils separately on October 13th. Special Agent Catherine Morrison from the DCI led Jennifer's interview. She asked Jennifer to walk through the entire day, minute by minute. Jennifer did, her hands twisting a tissue into shreds. She described feeding Christina, putting her down for her nap, going outside with Robert. Agent Morrison asked about their marriage. "Fine," Jennifer said. "Normal. Any financial problems?" "Some," Jennifer admitted. Robert's hours at the garage had been cut back. They were behind on the mortgage. Any arguments? Sometimes about money, but nothing serious. Agent Morrison asked if Robert had ever been rough with Christina. Jennifer's head snapped up. "No," she said. "Never. He loved Christina. He was a good father." FBI agent David Reese interviewed Robert in a separate room. Robert sat very still, answering each question after a brief pause, as if considering his words carefully. He described his movements that afternoon with precision, went to the garage at 1:10. Jennifer came out around 1:20. They moved the workbench, took down the snow tires, organized some tools. He never left Jennifer's sight. Agent Reese asked if he was certain about the timeline. Robert nodded, completely certain. Agent Reese asked if anyone could verify their whereabouts during that window. Robert said no, they had been alone. He asked if he needed a lawyer. Agent Reese said that was his right, but they were just trying to gather information. Robert said he did not need a lawyer. He had nothing to hide. Deputies canvassed the neighborhood. Of the 8 houses on Birch Street, 4 families had been home that afternoon. None had seen or heard anything unusual. No unfamiliar cars. No strangers walking past. Mrs. Alina Hoffman, who lived directly across the street, had been in her kitchen from 1 until 3, her window facing the McNeil house. She had noticed Robert's truck in the driveway. She had not seen anyone approach the house. She had not heard a baby crying. When asked if that struck her as odd, given that Bobby's cry and the window had been open, she fell silent, then said she had not thought about it that way. The physical evidence told a confusing story. The window screen showed no tool marks, no indication it had been pried or cut. It had simply been pushed from inside. The window sill, examined under magnification, revealed no foreign fingerprints, no scuff marks from shoes, no fibers caught on the wood. The drop to the ground below was significant. An investigator testing the theory climbed through the window and lowered himself. Even hanging from his fingertips and dropping, he landed hard, stumbling. The idea of someone climbing through while holding an infant seemed implausible. Yet the grass below showed no indentations, no disturbed soil, nothing to indicate a ladder had been placed there. Inside the house, investigators found everything exactly as Jennifer described. The bottle Christina had taken at 1 o'clock sat in the sink, still containing an ounce of formula. The diaper Jennifer had changed lay in the diaper pail. Christina's other clothes were folded in dresser drawers. Her car seat remained in Jennifer's vehicle. Every window and door on the ground floor had been locked from inside when deputies first arrived, according to both Jennifer and Robert. The back door, which they had used to go to the garage, had been unlocked. But to access the nursery window from outside would require a ladder tall enough to reach the second story, and no such ladder had been found on the property or reported missing from anywhere in town. Those who knew Robert McNeil offered conflicting portraits. His employer, Dale Anderson, said Robert was reliable, competent, showed up on time, did quality work. But he kept to himself, did not socialize much with the other mechanics. His high school classmates, tracked down and interviewed, remembered him as quiet, a decent student, not particularly popular but not disliked. Jennifer's parents, Diane and Harold Pierce, said Robert had always treated Jennifer well as far as they knew, but they admitted he was hard to read. He did not express emotion easily. When Christina was born, Harold said, Robert had seemed pleased but not overjoyed. Not the way Harold had been when Jennifer was born. It was just Robert's way, Diane added quickly. Some men were like that. Deputies whispered quietly among themselves about small things that did not fit. Robert's truck had been parked in the driveway that afternoon. Deputy Holland noted the odometer reading during a routine documentation of vehicles on the property: 32,412 miles. The garage where Robert and Jennifer claimed to have been working sat clearly visible from the back door of the house. Yet neither had heard anything: no window opening, no screen falling. The baby monitor had been on. Its range was tested. It picked up sounds from the nursery clearly in the kitchen, the living room, even partway into the backyard. But Jennifer said she had not taken it outside, had not thought to, had not been gone that long. On October 15th, 3 days after Christina vanished, divers searched Miller's Pond, a large farm pond 2 miles from the McNeil house. They found nothing. On October 17th, a psychic from Nebraska arrived uninvited, claiming visions of Christina near water. Sheriff Bradshaw escorted her to the town limits and told her not to return. On October 20th, a tip came in that a woman matching Christina's description had been seen at a rest stop outside Iowa City. State troopers responded. It was a different child. Clears throat. The investigation began to focus inevitably on the parents. Statistics supported this. In cases of missing infants, family members were responsible more than 70% of the time. Agent Morrison interviewed Jennifer's friends, her coworkers at the library, her former teachers. Everyone described a devoted mother, attentive, loving. But several mentioned that Jennifer had seemed tired lately, overwhelmed. One friend, speaking confidentially, said Jennifer had confided that motherhood was harder than she had expected, that sometimes she felt like she was drowning. Agent Reese ran a background check on Robert. No criminal record, no history of violence, but there were debts. The mortgage was 3 months behind. Credit cards were maxed out. Robert had borrowed money from his father 6 months earlier and had not paid it back. When asked about the financial situation, Robert acknowledged it but said they were managing. They always managed. He seemed irritated by the question, the first emotion he had displayed since the investigation began. On October 25th, 2 weeks after Christina disappeared, the search was officially scaled back. The decision came from the top, from state investigators who had exhausted every lead, followed every tip, interviewed everyone even remotely connected to the case. They had found no evidence of an intruder. No ransom demand had been made. No body had been discovered. Sheriff Bradshaw announced at a press conference that the case remained open and active, but resources had to be reallocated. The assembled reporters asked the question everyone was thinking. Did he believe Christina McNeil was still alive? Sheriff Bradshaw said he hoped so. He prayed so, but he could not say so with certainty. The case went cold. Part 3: The Silence. For those who have ever doubted someone you love, who have felt suspicion curl around your thoughts like smoke you cannot quite grasp or dispel, you might understand the months that followed for Jennifer McNeil. She returned to work at the library in January 1995, 3 months after Christina vanished. The director had held her position. Coworkers treated her with careful kindness, speaking in soft voices, avoiding the topic that hung over everything like a held breath. Jennifer reshelved books in the children's section, and sometimes had to leave the room. Robert went back to the garage. He worked longer hours, took overtime when it was offered. He came home after dark, ate whatever Jennifer had prepared or had not prepared, watched television in silence. They did not talk about Christina. When Jennifer tried, Robert would stand up and leave the room. He could not, he said once, the only time he explained himself. He just could not. They still lived in the house on Birch Street. Jennifer's mother suggested they move, that staying in that house with that empty nursery was not healthy. But they could not afford to move, could barely afford to stay. Robert had taken on a second job, weekend work at a loading dock in Cedar Rapids, 30 miles away. He was gone most of the time. When he was home, he was somewhere else. Jennifer started seeing a therapist in February 1995, a woman named Dr. Linda Vasquez who specialized in trauma and grief. In their sessions, Jennifer talked about the guilt, the endless loop of that afternoon playing in her mind. If she had not gone outside, if she had brought the monitor with her, if she had checked on Christina sooner. Dr. Vasquez told her gently that she could not have known, could not have prevented something she could not have anticipated. But Jennifer could not accept this. A mother should know, a mother should protect her child. In March, on what would have been Christina's first birthday, Jennifer found herself unable to get out of bed. Robert had already left for work. She lay there as the sun moved across the ceiling, thinking about the party they would have had. The cake, the presents, Christina smashing frosting into her hair. When Robert came home that evening, Jennifer was still in bed. He stood in the doorway. She waited for him to say something, to acknowledge the day, to show some sign that he felt it too. He said he was going to take a shower. He closed the door. Those who worked with Robert at the garage noticed changes. He grew more withdrawn. He made mistakes he had never made before, simple errors that cost time and money. Once, Dale Anderson found him sitting in the break room, staring at nothing, his lunch untouched. Dale asked if he was all right. Robert said he was fine. He was always fine. The marriage deteriorated in small, quiet ways. Conversations became functional exchanges about bills, about whose turn it was to buy groceries, about the water heater that needed replacing. They stopped touching. They slept on opposite sides of the bed, a space between them that might as well have been a wall. Jennifer's mother asked once if they were going to be okay. Jennifer said she did not know. She could not read Robert anymore, could not reach him. It was like living with a stranger. In June 1995, 8 months after Christina's disappearance, something shifted. Jennifer came home from the library to find Robert in Christina's nursery. He was sitting in the rocking chair, holding one of Christina's blankets. His face was wet. Jennifer had not seen him cry, not once in all these months. She stood in the doorway. He looked up at her. He said he was sorry. She asked what he was sorry for. He said everything, just everything. They tried after that. They tried to talk, to reconnect, to find their way back to each other. But the weight was too heavy. Trust, once cracked, proves difficult to mend. Jennifer found herself watching Robert sometimes, studying his face when he did not know she was looking, trying to see past his stillness to what lay beneath. She hated herself for it, but she could not stop. If you have noticed someone you love behaving strangely, small inconsistencies in their story, reactions that do not quite match the situation, you understand the torture of uncertainty. Jennifer noticed things. How Robert never mentioned Christina's name unless Jennifer said it first. How he had cleared out the nursery in April without asking her, boxing up the clothes and toys and storing them in the attic. How he refused to attend the prayer vigil held on the 6-month anniversary of Christina's disappearance. How he seemed, in ways she could not quite define, relieved when the active investigation ended. She began keeping a journal, writing down her thoughts, her doubts, her memories of that October afternoon. She wrote down questions. Why had Robert been so insistent they work in the garage that day? Why had he changed his shirt before the police arrived? Why did his hands look so clean? She wrote these things and then hid the journal in her dresser drawer, ashamed of what her own mind was suggesting. In September 1995, Jennifer's father suffered a heart attack. Mild, survivable, but frightening. Jennifer spent days at the hospital, then weeks helping her mother with his recovery. During this time, Robert seemed to retreat further. He started working night shifts, sleeping during the day. They barely saw each other. When they did, they were polite, distant, like roommates who shared nothing but space. The nightmare started for Jennifer around this time. She would dream she was in the house, running up the stairs, but the stairs kept going up and up, never reaching the second floor. Or she would dream she found Christina in the crib, alive and well, but when she reached down to pick her up, the baby would disappear, would simply cease to exist the moment Jennifer's hands touched her. She would wake gasping, her heart pounding, Robert's side of the bed empty. For those who have lived with unspoken truths, with questions you cannot ask because you fear the answers too deeply, the years that followed were a kind of slow suffocation for Jennifer McNeil. 1996 passed. 1997. Christina would have been 3, 4, starting preschool, learning to ride a tricycle. The anniversaries came and went. The local paper ran a story each October for the first few years, then stopped. The case file gathered dust. Jennifer and Robert separated in May 1998. There was no dramatic confrontation, no final argument. Jennifer simply told him she could not do this anymore. Robert asked what she meant. She said she meant all of it, this life, this pretending, this silence. He asked if she wanted a divorce. She said she did not know what she wanted. He moved out the next week, took an apartment in Waterloo. They told people they needed space, time to heal separately. No one was surprised. Part 4. The Revelation. The truth, when it finally emerged, came not from some brilliant detective work or dramatic confession, but from a moment of ordinary conversation that spiraled into something no one expected. In April 2023, nearly 29 years after Christina McNeil vanished, Robert McNeil was living in Clear Lake, Iowa, working maintenance at a resort on the lake. He had remarried in 2004, a woman named Patricia who knew about his past, about the daughter who had disappeared. They had no children together. Patricia would later tell investigators that Robert never talked about Christina, that if she asked, he would shut down completely. Robert had a younger brother, Michael McNeil, who had moved to Oregon in the late 90s and had minimal contact with the family. But in April 2023, Michael's daughter, Robert's niece Sarah, was passing through Iowa on a road trip. She was 26, had never met her Uncle Robert but knew the family story. Out of curiosity, she reached out. Robert agreed to meet her for coffee. They met at a diner in Clear Lake on April 15, 2023. Sarah later described her uncle as quiet, reserved, but not unfriendly. They talked about her trip, about Michael, about family news. Then Sarah, perhaps feeling emboldened by the rapport they had built, asked about Christina. She said she had always wondered what happened, that it must have been terrible. Robert went very still. He said it was a long time ago. Sarah said she knew, but still he must think about it. Robert looked at her across the table and said something that made Sarah's stomach turn cold. He said, "Some things are better left buried." Sarah did not know what to make of this. The phrase struck her as odd, the way he said it, the look on his face. She finished her coffee. They parted ways, but the conversation stayed with her. That night in a hotel room in Des Moines, she called her father. She told him what Robert had said. Michael was silent for a long moment. Then he told her something he had never told anyone. The night before Christina disappeared, Robert had called him. This was unusual. They were not close, rarely spoke. Robert had called and asked Michael if he ever felt trapped in his life, if he ever wanted to just walk away from everything. Michael had been half asleep, had mumbled something about everyone feeling that way sometimes. Robert had said thank you and hung up. Michael had forgotten about it until the news broke about Christina. He had thought about mentioning it to investigators but had not wanted to believe his own brother could be involved. So he had said nothing. For 29 years he had said nothing. Michael McNeil contacted the Iowa Division of Criminal Investigation on April 18, 2023. He spoke with Special Agent Rachel Torres, who had recently reviewed several cold cases, including Christina McNeil's. She listened to Michael's story, took detailed notes, pulled the original case file. She read through the interviews, the inconsistencies, the unanswered questions. She read Deputy Chen's notes about Robert's clean hands, the changed shirt, his strange composure. She began building a timeline. On May 2, 2023, Agent Torres drove to Clear Lake. She arrived at the resort where Robert worked and asked to speak with him. Robert, now 60 years old, his hair gray, his face lined, agreed. They sat in his supervisor's office. Agent Torres asked if he remembered the investigation into Christina's disappearance. He said of course he remembered. She asked if he would be willing to answer some new questions that had arisen. He said he had answered every question back then. She said she understood, but sometimes new information came to light. She asked where he had been, exactly, on the afternoon of October 12, 1994. Robert repeated the story he had told nearly 3 decades ago. He had been in the garage with Jennifer. Agent Torres asked if that was completely true. Robert's face changed, a flicker of something. He said yes. She asked if he had been in the garage the entire time between 1:15 and 2:45. Robert hesitated. The hesitation lasted 3 seconds. Then he said yes, the entire time. Agent Torres asked why. If that was true, the odometer on his truck had shown evidence of recent use when deputies had documented it. Robert said he did not understand the question. Agent Torres said the garage was dust-free, the truck clean, but the odometer suggested the vehicle had been driven that day. Robert said he had driven to work that morning. Clears throat. The interview continued for 2 hours. Agent Torres pressed gently but persistently. She asked about the phone call to his brother. Robert denied it at first, then admitted he might have called. He could not remember, it was so long ago. She asked about his finances in 1994. Robert said they had been struggling but managing. She asked if they had taken out a life insurance policy on Christina. Robert went pale. He said yes, a small policy, $250,000, standard practice. She asked when they had taken it out. He said a few months before Christina was born. She asked if he remembered that he had increased the policy amount from $50,000 to $250,000 6 weeks before Christina disappeared. She asked if Jennifer had known about this increase. Robert said he could not remember. His hands, she noted in her report, were shaking. Robert McNeil was arrested on May 2, 2023, on suspicion of involvement in the disappearance and suspected death of Christina Marie McNeil. The arrest made national news. In Dysart, now a town of fewer than 1,300 people, the reaction was one of shock layered over something else. There were those who said they had always suspected, had always felt something was not right about Robert's behavior that day. There were others who said this was persecution of a man who had already suffered more than anyone should have to suffer. The town split along invisible lines of belief and doubt. Jennifer McNeil, who had remarried in 2006 and now went by Jennifer Caldwell, was living in Minnesota when she heard the news. A reporter called her for a comment. She said she had no comment. Then she said, "I knew." When the reporter asked what she meant, she said, "In my heart, I always knew. I just could not prove it." The case against Robert McNeil was built on circumstantial evidence, the kind that accumulates like snow, each flake individually insignificant, together creating an insurmountable weight. There was the insurance policy. There were the financial records showing Robert had been in severe debt, facing possible foreclosure. There was the lack of evidence of any intruder, any forced entry, any stranger in the area. There was the timeline that did not quite work, the window that could not have been accessed without leaving traces, the screen that had been pushed from inside. There was the odometer reading that suggested the truck had been moved. And then there was the pond. In June 2023, acting on a theory developed by Agent Torres, investigators brought ground-penetrating radar equipment to Miller's Pond. the same pond that had been searched in 1994. But this time, they searched the area around the pond, the banks, the wooded sections nearby. The technology had advanced significantly in nearly 3 decades. On June 12th, the equipment detected an anomaly in a wooded area approximately 50 yards from the pond's edge. They brought in cadaver dogs. The dogs alerted. They began to dig. What they found, buried 3 feet deep in soil that had been undisturbed for decades, were the remains of an infant. The body had been wrapped in a plastic tarp, then placed in a sealed container. Dental records confirmed what everyone already knew. Christina Marie McNeil had been found. Robert McNeil's trial began in February 2024. The prosecution laid out a theory of the crime. Robert, facing financial ruin, had increased the life insurance policy on his infant daughter. On October 12, 1994, while Jennifer was in the house, Robert had smothered Christina, placed her body in his truck, hidden under a tarp in the truck bed. He had created the staging in the nursery, pushing out the screen to suggest an abduction. He and Jennifer had gone to the garage together as planned, but at some point, Robert had claimed he needed to run to the hardware store for something. Jennifer, distracted with the work, had not questioned this. Robert had driven to Miller's Pond, a location he knew well from fishing trips, and buried his daughter in a pre-dug grave. He had returned within 45 minutes. The round-trip distance matched the odometer reading exactly. The defense argued reasonable doubt. There was no direct evidence, no witnesses, no confession. The odometer reading could be explained by the drive to work. The insurance policy increase was not suspicious in itself. The burial site could have been used by anyone. Robert McNeil, they argued, was an innocent man who had lost his daughter and was now being persecuted by a system desperate to solve a cold case. Jennifer testified. She sat in the witness stand and described October 12, 1994 in precise detail. She said she could not remember Robert leaving the garage, but admitted she had been focused on the work, had not been watching him constantly. She said after all these years, the memories were not clear. But when the prosecutor asked if she believed her ex-husband had killed their daughter, she looked directly at Robert. She said yes, she believed he had. The jury deliberated for 4 days. On March 7, 2024, they returned a verdict: guilty of second-degree murder, guilty of abuse of a corpse, guilty of insurance fraud. Robert McNeil showed no emotion as the verdict was read. He was sentenced to life in prison without possibility of parole. At the sentencing hearing, the judge asked if Robert had anything to say. Robert stood. He looked at Jennifer, who sat in the gallery, her face composed still. He said, "I'm sorry," nothing else. Just those 2 words. Whether he was apologizing for the crime or for the years of silence or for something else entirely, no one could say. Jennifer did not react. She stood and left the courtroom before he was led away. Closing. The case of Christina McNeil, like so many cases where the truth hides behind the facade of ordinary life, forces us to confront uncomfortable realities about trust, about family, about the masks people wear even to those who love them most. Christina was 7 months old when she died. She never learned to walk, never spoke her first word, never had the chance to become whoever she might have been. Her mother spent nearly 30 years carrying the weight of suspicion and grief. Her father spent those same years carrying the weight of what he had done. In Dysart, Iowa, the white house with green shutters on Birch Street still stands. New owners have painted it gray. The maple trees have grown taller. The town has moved forward, as towns do, absorbing tragedy into its history, its collective memory. But there are those who remember that October day in 1994 when a baby vanished, and a community learned that sometimes the greatest danger comes from the places we should be safest. Christina Marie McNeil was laid to rest in Dysart Cemetery on April 3, 2024, 30 years after her death. Her gravestone is small, pink granite, engraved with her name, her dates, and a single line: "Forever our baby." Justice, when it comes late, cannot restore what was lost, but it can restore truth, and sometimes truth is all we have left. If this story mattered to you, subscribe and hit the bell. Share the episode. Someone somewhere may still be waiting to be heard.